Welcome to the UNSECURITY podcast. Each week, Evan and Brad give an inside look at current information security news, breaches, best practices, and other things you should know to improve your information security. Here are your hosts, FRSecure's Evan Francine and Brad Nye.
Hey, UNSECURITY listeners. Welcome to episode 53 of the podcast. It is November 11th, 2019. And if you're wondering whose strange voice this is, if you're an avid listener of ours, you will recognize that it is not Evan or Brad's voice. That's because I am not either Evan or Brad. My name is Brandon Mattis, and I am on the marketing team at FRSecure. You could kind of say that I'm the producer of the show. Evan and Brad bring a depth of information security knowledge and experience, and I think they do a really good job of staying up to date with the trends and the current news and that kind of thing. And so I don't necessarily have to provide them a ton of direction from a content standpoint, but I do a lot of the things that get the podcast in your hands every week. So the editing, I publish it, I make sure it's on social, that kind of thing, just so that it can get to our listeners' hands on a weekly basis. So Evan approached me this week asking me to do the podcast. And, you know, when he approached me in the break room, he was like, "Hey, Brandon, you're going to do the podcast this week." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm going to do the podcast?" So because I write for FRSecure primarily, I'm not one to talk in front of crowds or record my voice for hundreds of people to listen to. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking at first, but once he told me what the direction was going to be for episode 53, I kind of got to understand why he would ask me to do that. So like I kind of mentioned, I typically write, and storytelling is a big part of what I do at FRSecure. And that's kind of what episode 53 is about. So being that it's episode 53, last week was episode 52, we've hit our 1-year anniversary of recording the show. And so Evan and Brad were hoping that I could kind of take a look back from a story perspective at some of the segments and things that they talked about episodes 1 through episode 52, and just do a little bit of a year in review so that we could all look back and pick out some of the most interesting stories or, the most pertinent topics, or knowing Evan and Brad, some of the most quirky conversations that happened over the course of the year. So obviously I'm going to start with episode 1. I'd be remiss if I didn't. We've definitely improved a lot of things since episode 1. But it's kind of fun to go back and listen to where we were when we kicked this thing off. If you know Evan personally or have gotten to know Evan through the podcast, you'll kind of understand that he's one of those guys that just gets an idea in his head and he's like, all right, let's roll with this. And so we were definitely a little bit fly by the seat of the pants at the beginning of this, but we've gotten significantly better. And I think that there was a particular conversation in episode 1 that kind of set the stage for what Evan and Brad were the direction that they're going to take this show moving forward. So there's a good conversation about passwords and how we treat passwords and how we manage passwords. And I think that, it was an interesting topic and one that we often don't think about, even though passwords are hyper prevalent.
So one of the reasons why, strong passwords is we're trying to prevent attackers from guessing them or cracking them, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so if I choose, common English or common, obfuscation techniques, attackers can guess them. And if they guess them, it's probably in a dictionary file, and so it's trivial for them to, get that password. The other one is password cracking, where maybe I've got the hash values of passwords, and so I'm trying to do an offline, cracking of those passwords. And so if you make them longer, it makes it more difficult for the attacker to get the passwords through those two methods, right?
Right.
But what I think is the most common method of getting passwords is just asking people, right?
I think that's the easiest way.
Yeah, I mean, just do a phishing attack, right?
Yep.
And so you were talking too about, breaches and some of the incidents we've been working on recently. And I'd say the last 5 incidents that I've been involved in have started through phishing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where a user just gives them the password. Now, there's 2 parts to that too, right? It's, obviously we don't want users clicking on links and giving passwords. That's bad. But let's assume that we can't ever eliminate that problem, right? There will always be some percentage of users who will always click on links, who will always give out passwords. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
So then we try to limit what an attacker could do if they did get that password.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why it's so important to have 2-factor authentication on anything external. And so, you try to explain that to companies, yet still so many companies are slow to adopt that. I think they're getting better at it.
Well, yeah, I think so. And what's crazy is there's so many at this point good or cheap or free solutions. It's almost silly not to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. I think it is silly, and I think there's this whole thing about, okay, a breach happens and litigation and liability. That's one of those things that's always kind of fluctuating. I think some people are losing patience with other companies. They're getting tired of it. So, but I just can't imagine that if I were drug into court or something, how would it's really kind of becoming indefensible because it's just so common.
Right. Well, so I wanted to look it up because I wanted to make sure I got the right numbers. But so 2018 data breach investigation from Verizon, they said out of the report, 93% of all the social breaches were from, let's see, hold on. 93% of the breaches, 96 was email. 96% of the social breaches was email. So yeah, it's incredibly easy to do. And it's so easy to help prevent with that multi-factor.
Well, and this isn't anything new.
So I found 2 things super interesting about that conversation. One, passwords are probably never going anywhere, and yet we still don't do a good job of managing them. And 2, we're oftentimes just giving bad people our passwords, which obviously it's going to be very hard to stay secure if it's easy for an attacker to just kind of weasel the information out of us. So I wanted to skip ahead to episode 4 for the next segment. Episode 4 featured a super interesting conversation about the Marriott breach. If you remember correctly, Marriott experienced, or at least announced, a massive, massive breach in November of 2018. And before I had read about this story, before I had started in information security, purchasing companies and thinking about their security wasn't even something that had crossed my mind. And I think this breach and this conversation brings an important component of security to light, which is if you're going to be purchasing a company, you really need to be thinking about how secure they are, because you're in turn purchasing their security or lack thereof. And in this case, Marriott purchased a breach from the company that they bought. So listen into this conversation on episode 4. I think it's a really, really interesting one.
So you mentioned, what about this issue of they bought a breach?
Yeah.
How many times do we see companies acquiring other companies and security is either an afterthought or not a thought at all?
All the time. I was thinking back, I've been doing this, I've been here 2.5 years almost. Yeah, 2.5 years. And one company has hired us to build do a acquisition assessment. Despite us talking to a lot of them, I just had another customer that bought a company, and they were like, "Oh,
well, before we integrate them onto the network or AD, we do want to do an assessment against them to understand what we just bought. Like, well, all right, well, better than not doing it at all. But I guess ideally you'd want to do it before you bought them, but better late than never.
Yeah.
At least they didn't integrate them into their, AD and onto, and it's totally separate. It's on its own. So at least they're getting there. But no, you don't see it very often.
It's funny. I mean, sometimes I just want to record what they say and then play it back. We want to do a security assessment before we integrate them so we know what we bought. I mean, think about that for a second.
Right. Well, and I think part of it could be also is not necessarily, I don't want to say that it's a shot at the security of that company, right? That they may not have been told or been aware of it. And then, hey, we bought this other company and now it's already been done. So what can we do to minimize it? I think that goes to, security not being adopted at the top, right? It's not integrated into the culture.
The Marriott breach is just crazy to me. I mean, just the sheer amount of data that was leaked alone is insane. But then to think about it from a business perspective, a lot of companies just aren't thinking about information security as at the forefront of purchasing companies. And I hope that this does, kind of serve as a lesson to those companies out there that are looking to acquire a company, to consider information security first and foremost. So the next conversation and topic I wanted to bring up comes from episode 6. And I believe this is a monumental episode because I'm pretty sure it was the first time that Evan and Brad had a guest on. So in this episode, they're joined by a man named Wade who runs a K through 12 cybersecurity program. And I think this is an important conversation because we talk a lot about how there's not enough good people getting into the information security industry. And even those people that, have a lot of experience or have the technical skills are having a hard time breaking through. And so I think it's important that we continue to give back to the community. Not only that, but also to try to get people involved in information security. And it's really cool that there are people that are trying to do that and instill that in people at a young age. So this is a fun conversation. Listen into this topic in episode 6.
So you have this program. How did you start it? Who started it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So just backtracking a little bit, like I had mentioned, the Compass program's been around for quite some time. So there's this structure of leadership around Compass, so individuals who have the connections with businesses already and have connection with the local colleges and stuff. So I think in a sense that team is always on the lookout for, okay, what are the topics? What are the industry needs out there? What are people asking us, from a K-12 perspective to, begin to develop from a skill set point of view in our program so kids can leave either being college career ready or being able to enter the workforce as they go out. So I think that team was, instrumental in getting it started. And we have these two just, really exceptional teachers as part of this program who are willing to partner up, from a math perspective and then a cybersecurity perspective and come together and pick up really a new curriculum and kind of go out on the edge a little bit to say, hey, let's try this and see how it works. So I think those two started it, but ultimately, it comes down to, okay, are the students interested? And are they going to sign up and really, maybe in their senior year where they could be doing all kinds of other things, dive deeper into something like advanced statistics or, complicated applied math, and then also do things like cybersecurity. I think as Brad mentioned, these kids who are in this class, boys and girls, which was awesome to have girls who were really interested in cybersecurity as well. But they're highly motivated typically, and they're really looking to try to figure out, hey, is this something I want to do, and actually, begin to take the next step as they leave the high school program and go into something down the line. just kind of those different components, and then, finding partners, good partners like you all who can help make it happen, because it's really not real and relevant unless we have, business partners and people who are willing to mentor, to show up, to do, co-teaching and things like that.
Yeah. So my question is to you, Wade, is should I not tell you we're going to have a lockpick table when we have our neighbors over, or are you okay?
I want to see the lockpick. Actually, if you're gonna bring the lockpick back into the class, you need to invite me so I can learn a few things too.
Okay, so it's probably not the best idea to give kids lock-picking sets and then teach them how to use those lock-picking sets to actually pick locks. But it is one of the best ideas in the world to get kids involved in information security and get them excited about security at an early age. So I do appreciate the things that people like Wade are doing for the community. And I also thought that was a really important conversation to be had. So I want to move on to episode 9 for the next topic that we talk about here. Episode 9, Evan comes to you live from Cancun. And besides giving Brad a bunch of crap for being stuck in the frigid Minnesota winters that we have here, there was a really good conversation that Evan and Brad had about a man that Evan met on the plane on the way down to Cancun, and his name was Tom. So without giving too much away, Tom kind of represents the everyday person, the people that aren't security experts, the people that maybe don't know a lot about security, but the people that would be heavily, heavily impacted if their information were to be leaked, if their personal information were to be leaked in a breach. So I thought this was a really interesting conversation, and I hope that you do too.
So that first book was written to the audience was people like me and you. This book is written for what I call normal people. So hopefully it'll resonate with, the everyday person on what they should be doing to protect themselves better.
Yeah, well, I mean, based on some of the feedback you're seeing on LinkedIn from your posts, I think there's definitely some passion around it.
Yeah, that surprised me. So for those of you who haven't seen on LinkedIn, I took a picture. Well, I met somebody, Tom, on the flight down from St. Louis to Cancun on Saturday, and just fell in love with the guy. I mean, he's a 68-year-old, was a 6th grade teacher. He's retired. And we had a really good conversation. One of the things he said is, something to the effect that 2nd graders, know more about information security than he does.
Yeah.
And so people like Tom really are the inspiration for this second book. So I posted it on LinkedIn expecting, normally happy to get 20 likes maybe and a couple thousand views. This one,
I'm happy to get a couple hundred, man.
I know. Well, it surprised me because I posted it on a Sunday.
Right.
At the end of the day on Sunday, we almost had, 80,000 views. I think it's 150,000. Yeah. So people love Tom. That's good. People should love Tom, and let's help Tom. Let's work for Tom.
I think if you're going to go viral on social media, going viral because you met somebody who represents the exact thing that you're trying to fix, the exact reason that you started your company, the exact reason that you do what you do every day, I think that's a really, really cool reason to go viral. And I just thought that was a great story that I wanted to bring back for you all to hear. So moving on to episode 16. Episode 16 was probably our most popular episode, if not our most popular episode. So Evan and Brad are joined by their wives on episode 16. And primarily they talk about just the sheer amount of volume of work that Evan and Brad do. And I think this is both a testament to, one, how supportive and awesome both of their wives have been as spouses, and two, how much investment Evan and Brad have put into the company and the industry and just giving back. And so I thought this was an important topic to bring back. Also, I think it's just hilarious to listen to the wives give the boys a hard time about how much they are working. So this will be a fun one. I hope you enjoy this segment too.
Guesstimate the number of hours a week I work, and is it too much?
He's wincing right now. I don't know. Gosh, I'd say maybe 55, 60.
60 is a bad week.
Okay.
On a regular basis. But I would say 50 to 55 is probably pretty accurate.
And,
Marlis has got her calculator out. Are you kidding me? They can't be that big. No, that's not even close.
Are you kidding me?
Is that what? Oh God, my number's not going to be good. You guys.
I guess we'll be deleting this episode.
Okay.
Am I answering now? Oh.
So 50?
I think
55?
50 to 55.
Okay.
I try to keep it to 45 or less, but that doesn't happen very often.
And of course, I think it's too much.
All right, Marlis, tell the truth now. I mean.
Okay, I'm going to.
No.
No, I'm going to be nice.
I haven't even answered the question yet.
No, he already asked that question.
But I'm going to ask it of you.
Oh, okay.
Because I care about you.
Okay.
This is coming from my heart right
Okay.
now. Okay, love you. The question is, how many hours per week does your husband work? Is it too much? What's the right number of hours? How many hours a week do I work? You can do whatever the calculator said.
No, I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to be...
No, don't be nice. Tell the truth. Seriously. If I work too much, I work too much.
Please tell the truth.
Yeah.
Honestly, he works about 100 hours a week. And that's actually being low.
It's not impossible, is it?
It actually is possible. And is it too much? Yes.
It's about right. Feels about right.
What's the right number of hours?
110, probably.
I can't answer that question.
So we've been doing the show for 52 weeks now, and there has not been a funnier moment, in my opinion, than Evan's wife, Marlis, physically taking out a calculator to count the number of hours Evan's working because she wasn't able to do that math in her head. It's a hilarious visual is what it is. So I actually think that's an important segue or an interesting segue into episode 23, which is the next segment that I want to bring up. So in episode 23, we talk about the CISSP mentor program, and bouncing off the fact that Evan and Brad probably work more than they need to or more than they should. The CISSP mentor program is a free program that FRSecure has been hosting for 10 years now. And it is meant for people that are attempting to pass the CISSP exam. And Evan and Brad actually teach the prep course free of charge, and they teach it outside of their normal working hours. So it's usually like 6 to 8 at night, 2 nights a week. And I think it's a testament to how much time they've invested in getting people into the security industry. And it's frankly one of the most rewarding things we do here at FRSecure. We could be charging quite a bit for this, and we just don't, because there are some things that are bigger than money, and getting good people involved and interested in information security and breaking down some of the barriers that exist in preventing them to do so is super, super rewarding. And I've been thankful to have a big hand in this. I've facilitated the registration for the past couple of years, and I've been involved in, handing out the slide decks and doing the email communication on behalf of Evan and Brad. And it's always awesome to receive that note that says, hey, I passed this exam and you guys were the reason. So, I just wanted to share this. I think it's really, really wholesome, and I'm really happy that we do this here at FRSecure.
So for those, listeners who don't know, the CISSP mentor program, this is our 10th year straight of doing the mentor program. And it's completely free. There's no strings attached. Mm-hmm. And in today's society, everybody always thinks there's some strings attached to something. No. It's free. Come learn, come interact, come give feedback. I mean, this is about reaching out to the community and getting more security people.
Right.
One of the barriers to entry is cost, intimidation. Right. Don't be intimidated. Don't worry about the cost. Just come and learn with us.
And like I said, I just mentioned we have people that have done it multiple years.
Yeah.
and they're still feeling like they're not ready. I think, you know what, that's fine.
Go at your own pace, man.
Like, do your thing.
Right.
Like, even if you're just learning, I've told, non-security people in businesses that I've worked with, even if you have no intention of taking the test, that's fine. Listen.
Right.
It will change how you think. It'll change how you look at things.
Right.
For a positive, there's a benefit to it.
Absolutely. And everything in the class is free, right? We post the videos.
Yep.
We make the slides available.
Yep.
You can take the slides if you want to make them your slides. If you want to start your own information security training company using our slides, feel free.
It's all under that. You're releasing them under common Creative Commons.
Yep. Creative Commons. So you'll notice in the Creative Commons license, I didn't prohibit commercial use. You just have to keep it open.
Right.
Right. So that means you'd have to still tag it and you'd still have to allow us to use it. But you could start your own business if you wanted to using our material. I don't care. Right. It's about getting more people involved.
Again, we're doing it for free.
It's still free. Right. And I can't even tell you how many times over the years I've had business people try to make it not free.
Right.
I mean, even from, and they're like, and I get it, they're sneaky the way they do it too. Well, how about if we just charge them $500? I'm like, no. How about $100? No, it's free. It will always be free.
Well, and I think I like that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the argument to flip back at the business people is how much does it cost to find a new employee? Mm-hmm. I think the average is $40,000.
I heard 60.
Is it 60 now? So either way, I mean, that's to split the difference, $50,000.
Right.
If you get one person out of that, doesn't that far outweigh?
Well, look at our own company.
Right.
I mean, how many of our analysts went in or came through the mentor program?
Right.
Awesome people too, man. I mean,
or associate level or more junior people that have gone through it and passed.
Right.
Right. It's saved us that money. So I'm with you. Keep it free.
Well, and me is, being, and I know some people, get offended maybe or not. But me being a man of faith, truly believing that God is the CEO, that Jesus is the CEO of this business, I've received so many blessings from this. And blessings doesn't mean money.
Right.
There's peace of mind. There's, just this really, really good feeling, this joy that you helped other people with their career. Yeah. I mean, it's just stuff that you can't pay me for that.
When people give you the email, hey, I passed, thank you. It's like,
yeah, right?
Wow, that's awesome.
The CISSP mentor program will probably forever be one of my favorite things that we do here at FRSecure. If you're interested at all in information security, you don't have to be an expert to take the class. Like we said, it's free of charge, completely no strings attached. So be on the lookout for that. The registration typically opens up towards the end of the year. So we'll announce the dates here coming up and look out for that in the spring. But it's an absolutely amazing thing. And I'm super, super thankful that, I work for a company that is willing to do something like this. So the next episode that we're going to talk about here or listen in on is episode 30. And episode 30 brings in not the first conversation regarding incident response that we've had on the show, but I think one of the more baseline ones. So incident response is obviously becoming more prevalent. We know that we can't prevent all bad things from happening. And so it's important for us to have a plan for when something does so that it doesn't become a disaster. And the biggest thing, honestly, is just defining exactly what an incident is or what an event is and how we want to treat those once they're defined. So Evan and Brad give a pretty insightful look into how we categorize and define incidents and events here at FRSecure. So take a listen.
So having objective criteria where, just selecting certain things about an event or an incident, then having it automatically classify is really important because then important for a couple of reasons. One, you don't call my judgment into question, which, I may classify something totally different than you would. And we both have experience, right? Bring somebody who's a novice, who's never done this before. How will they classify it?
Make it as objective as possible, not, take as much of the subjectivity out of it as we can.
Yep. And then use colors, big, bold, bright colors, because if something's a high, make it as red as possible so that people, when I don't have to read to see that this is high. It's red.
I know.
So go to the other red parts.
Yeah. And so we've really come down to, we have 4 priority levels that we've identified. And as we work with people to build out their plans, this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And, I think when we do it, we did, P1, we've classified that as a critical incident or a likely breach. Okay. And that's a very, the wording is very intentional. Mm-hmm. So when you hear it's a P1, everybody always, I think, thinks their problem is always the most important.
Yeah.
But when you say, okay, it's a critical incident, okay, so you're telling me you've likely had a breach. Now you've got people's attention. No, I don't want to have a breach, right? So it makes them, I think, stop and think a little bit about, okay, what is this level? Is it truly drop everything right now and go? Now, examples of that, ransomware, I think absolutely, right? You've been
P1'd.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Denial of service attack, where you're down hard, some things like that. You've maybe gotten unauthorized access and you've verified, like this one that we were talking about, they came in last week and somebody's machine was logged in and locked within a user account that they didn't know. And it's a relatively small company. So they knew this is not an employee.
Right.
Well, that's unauthorized access to your information. Mm-hmm. P2 being a serious incident or a possible breach. So, all right, my guess is a lot of them are going to fall into that P2. Right? We don't know for sure, but we feel like there's the possibility that we've been breached. Brute force attacks, social engineering, maybe a malware outbreak, but not ransomed where we're locked out.
Right.
P3, moderate event, low likelihood of a breach. So,
So did you say P2?
P2.
So that's if we both drank a lot of water.
Yeah.
I'd have to P2.
There you go.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, you do have just the one kidney, so I don't know how that works.
I know, right? Still, it works awesome.
Oh, okay.
You only need one. Sorry, you're on P3.
P3 is a low likelihood of a breach, and P4 is a security event or non-incident. And I think it was important that we included. Oh, nope, it's just an event in the classification. And there's maybe
So you coach them through the characteristics to classify, right?
Yep, and building out a plan, and
because even the word like data breach, people debate. I don't think everybody knows what breach means.
True.
Oh, that's not a breach. Well, but half your customer database is online. I think that's a breach. Well, define breach. Oh God, really?
Right. Well, and that's a big part of the plan is defining an event versus an incident, and then defining what really each of these mean.
Other than the dad joke from Evan about using the bathroom and probably the TMI about Evan's kidneys, I think that was a really interesting conversation about incident response and how to define exactly what type of incident it is. It's important for every company to be able to know how to manage that. And sometimes it just takes that little bit of fundamentals to get going in the right direction. So I thought that was really intriguing. And, one of the things we talk about at FRSecure is that we can't prevent bad things from happening. And we know that's the case, but apparently, that's not a common line of thinking. So in episode 37, Evan and Brad are joined by Jim Nash. Jim Nash works as an information security evangelist for us here at FRSecure, but he's also a state representative, and cybersecurity is one of the big things he focuses on in the House. And together, the three of them talk about a kind of disturbing article that they came across where these companies are claiming that they have achieved security, that they are quote unquote unhackable. And frankly, the three guys kind of talk about how BS that is. And so this conversation is a little bit of a spicier one, and it's definitely one that's fascinating to listen into.
So anyway, so you sent me this link. I read through it, and there's some sort of troubling statements that are made. And the person that Ari Shapiro is interviewing is Richard Clark. Now, Richard Clark used to be the National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism for the United States.
A czar? Wasn't he called
a
czar?
I think so.
Yeah.
For a number of years.
Right.
I think he served not just in that position was 5 years, but he also served under like 4 or 5 presidents.
He's done a lot.
Yeah. So well respected too, right? And this isn't his first book. This is book like 10 for him.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of the book, what is it? Fifth Dimension?
Domain.
Fifth Domain?
Fifth Domain.
Yeah, there he is. The Fifth Domain. So I'm just going to read it for the listeners, and then let's talk about it. So Shapiro says, one line in the book stood out to me from somebody who was talking about election security, but could just as easily have been talking about other aspects of cybersecurity. And the line is, our house was robbed, so let's at least lock the door. The problem is there are so many doors in the United States, 50 states, thousands of counties, who knows how many private businesses. It's like 6 million. Each one of them is a target. So is it naive to think that anyone could prevent the house from being robbed again? That's his question to Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark says there are major American corporations that have achieved security, cybersecurity.
Was he doing air quotes when he said that?
I don't know. No, you can kind of envision that, right?
Right.
You can kind of envision that. They don't like to attract attention to themselves. They don't like me using their names, so I won't. But there are big American companies that have done it. 10 years ago, when we wrote the book Cyber War, we said no company is safe. If the Russians or Chinese want to get into your network, they can. Now we're saying that's no longer true.
So
is that implying that a company is unhackable?
Yeah,
to me it does.
That is. And I'll say Ari Shapiro's question and lead up was actually really good too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought so. But my question to him is, if the FSB can get hacked and have 7 terabytes of data, how in the world are you stopping it from a private company?
Right. Or the NSA loses 50 terabytes of data.
And so Evan and I are reading this article out loud. And I'm like, well, let's just listen to the interview because there's a link at the top of it for the audio that came from it. And sure enough, the guy actually said what you read, because when I read it, I'm like, there's no way. I didn't just read this. Turns out he said it.
And I think he believes it because later on he goes on to explain how it happens. So Shapiro then asks him, do you have something, Brad?
Well, and I'll let you go.
Oh, so
I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So Shapiro goes on. What do the companies that have not been successful? Sorry, let me start over again. What do the companies that have not been successfully hacked have in common? What are they doing right? Clark says the companies that are resilient spend more money on it and have a better governance model.
Does he have something to sell them?
Well, you're starting to think that, aren't you?
Okay. Just questioning it.
And they have a better governance model. Like there's some other super secret governance.
I can tell you from experience, governance is always just super well accepted.
Well, people love it
immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a better one. And so the guy in charge or gal in charge reports to a much higher level official. They're not buried
like a Zen master or
right.
like a Yoda-like figure.
When I have so many stories where this is just BS, but they're not buried in bureaucracy of the company. And in terms of just a raw metric, the good companies, the companies that are successful at this, so good companies, good doesn't mean perfect, and non-hackable means
implies
perfect.
Yeah.
But they're spending 8 to 10% of their IT budget securing their networks. There are banks in New York that are employing thousands of people and spending hundreds of millions of dollars each year. So I break that down in the blog post, like, okay, let's go through math and logic on this. And
because he certainly didn't.
Obviously not. Well, and does he not have any private sector experience or understand what risk is? Can you guarantee me that we've been driving for a long time, right? The roads are pretty safe nowadays. Can you guarantee me, if I spent more money on my car,
right,
I could guarantee that I wouldn't get hit? Or maybe if I had a direct link to the Department of Transportation.
I mean, it sounds like he's saying everything that all of us that do speaking engagements for the company here say doesn't work. So they have a higher level of governance, which means that they have lots of compliance. Compliance doesn't equal security.
Right.
He wants to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, great, because certainly that'll fix it if you have no idea what you're spending money on.
Right.
Good luck.
And we've all said it. You get at a certain point where you accept the risk. It's not the right business decision to spend more money to eliminate a risk. The risk doesn't present that much of a threat.
Yeah.
And let me pose this question. Is it not impossible to eliminate risk?
Well, it's never happened.
So
in the history of man.
Do these companies have no third-party vendors?
You'd have to cease to exist. Do they employ perfect people?
Right.
Infallible people that never make a mistake.
Yeah.
I can say with our phishing and other social engineering, that does not exist.
So there you have it. If you want to be unhackable, if you want to quote unquote achieve security, you have to eliminate all your people and completely eliminate data. Basically, you have to cease to exist. Moving on to the next conversation, episode 42 is kind of fitting that this is the topic because I'm a huge Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan. In the book and movie series, if you don't know what that is, they try to find the answer to quote unquote life, the universe, and everything. And they create a machine to do so, and it spits out the number 42. Well, it's fitting because in this episode 42, Evan and Brad are joined by Christophe Foulon, and he talks about the reason that he is in security, the why behind why he's in this industry. For him, the answer to life, the universe, and everything as far as his career goes. So I think this is a really interesting conversation, and it's fun to hear somebody's perspective on it. A guest's perspective on it. That's not Evan and Brad. So check this one out.
Christophe, what's your passion? What gets you what's so passionate about security for you?
I love helping people. I find myself in between the security engineers. I have a passion for the security field, but I also like helping the business, helping people do things more securely. I found in my first role as a help desk individual that individuals were doing things that left them exposed to common tactics that criminals would use. And just by sharing tips here and there, I saw the impact that it had on their lives. And seeing that impact just made me want to continue doing that.
Evan says this all the time. It's the people behind the data that are the reason why we care so much, right? If it wasn't somebody's personal information that was leaked, it wouldn't matter as much to us if a data breach occurred. So it's important that we continue to protect people, and I think that's a common theme among the industry. Speaking of protecting people, episode 46 hits home to Evan specifically, Brad quite a bit too. Mental health is something that generally we're not talking about enough as it is, but particularly as it relates to the information security industry. And I think that this is kind of a somber but yet uplifting reminder that, if you are struggling with these kind of things, that you're not alone, and there are people that are willing to help. So it's good to see that Evan and Brad and others in the industry are recognizing this as a concern and truly do want to help.
One thing that I agree with you on that you want to talk about was mental health, and that was part of your keynote. Mm-hmm. So I would agree this is a topic that isn't discussed nearly as much as it should. I know Ryan Cloutier, Cloutier, whatever. I'll get it. I'll just say enough of them and I'll get it right.
Yeah. RC. Just call him RC.
There you go. He's been pretty public about, some of the stuff that he's going through and with the ADHD and, you just don't see people talking about that. So, do you have your statistics?
Oh yeah.
You want to talk about them?
They're in my brain.
Let's talk about them.
Well, this was, before the keynote at Hacks and Hops, I was getting ready and it just kind of hit me that this is something I need to talk about. I need to talk about it a lot more often so I have the Mental Health Hackers t-shirt, right? And that's a great organization. So if you just Google Mental Health Hackers, you'll find them. They're relatively new, but they're doing great work in our industry and just making it safe for people to get help with mental health issues.
Right. There's such a stigma around it.
Right. Totally. So I wore the t-shirt for the keynote and then, just kind of called out on the crowd, look, statistically 5% of us are dealing with mental health issues at any given time. Right. So if you look out in the audience and there's 250 people here, say 200 because the math's easier. That means 10 of you right now.
Right.
I'm looking at you. You're looking at me. 10 of you are struggling.
Right.
And 50% of adult Americans deal with mental health issues at some point in their life. So half of us, 125 of us or 100 of us have dealt with this before. The sad thing is only 44% of people actually get help for it.
Yeah.
So it means that the 5 people that are struggling with it right now, if those statistics are true, that means that 2 of them won't seek help. And there is help. And so that's the lie, right? I mean, you tell yourself lies. We all have that voice. We all have a voice, right? That's telling us things, and some of those things that it tells us are healthy things. Some of those things that it tells us are not healthy things. And some of those non-healthy things are, it's helpless. You're hopeless. Right. Nobody understands. You're alone. Nobody gives a shit.
Right.
Excuse my language. Nobody cares. And all those are lies.
Right.
I think one of the things that we struggle with so much, and that's why it's a kind of a recurring topic on the UNSECURITY podcast, is just how key communication is. Obviously, communication is hyper relevant to the topic that we just listened in on, but moving into episode 47 too, it's really relevant there. So a lot of us have different definitions on exactly what information security is, and how it should be applied at a business level. And so episode 47 features a really good discussion on just what the definition of information security is and how we can ensure that we, make it a point of focus moving forward within all of our businesses.
So the first question I had was, what is information security? And I've asked this question a trillion times, it seems like, but I keep getting answers all over the place. So you're going to laugh.
I know. I'm trying to think of, it's too early. I was going to try and come up with some sort of a smart ass answer for it, but I can't come up with one. It's too early.
Because we're all information security people, right? We're in this industry. Should we not have a common definition of what information security is?
Yeah. I know what ours is, right? Yeah, I think we're on the same page. It's protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data through the use of physical, administrative, physical, and technical controls.
Right.
Boom. Done.
Yeah, true. And so another thing in that definition is managing risk.
Yep.
Right. It's not eliminating risk. It's managing risk.
Right. Well, we can eliminate risk. I do use your line all the time because we get asked, how do I eliminate risk? Or, how do I...
What's the biggest thing I can do to reduce it?
If you don't want any risk, close.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will have risk. Fire everyone and go home. You don't have any risk.
Right. And these are just basic fundamentals, right? The definition of information security. So the important part, and we've always driven home the CIA piece, right? So when you get to that part, everybody is like rolling their eyes like, yeah, I got it. it's like, okay, but you focus so much of your time and money and effort on protecting confidentiality that you would think that's the end all be all.
Right.
But then you also, part of our definition is administrative, physical, and technical controls. And people also agree to that, yet you look at their programs and they're overemphasized on technology. Yeah. They treat it like it's an IT issue. It's still reporting to the CIO. Mm-hmm. It's still not considered as a part of any other business risk that, you would consider at the board.
Right.
So it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it.
I think they hit the nail on the head there that it's one thing to say you're going to do something and it's another thing to actually do it. And accountability is a super important component to information security. So I thought that was a really, really important and relevant topic of discussion there. And that segues pretty nicely into episode 50. So episode 50, Evan and Brad discuss personal training and personal security awareness. And I think that's something that's important for businesses to kind of take control of too. If you can tailor your training and tailor your security programs based on the strengths and weaknesses of your individuals, and then kind of measure them so that you can make sure that they're actually making improvements based on those strengths and weaknesses, you can really bolster your security program in a big way. So check out this conversation about episode 50. I think it's a really, really important one.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, first the limitations in traditional training and awareness programs.
It's funny because we actually got an email on Friday from someone saying exactly that. Like, hey, yeah, the pre-canned stuff is what it is, but it's not super effective. People don't really pay attention. What do you guys, can you help us? Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes, we can.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, right? In training and awareness programs, I'm telling you how to protect me. How do you protect my assets and our customers instead of how do you protect you?
Right. Well, and that's kind of our whole approach is protecting personal and corporate, right? Mm-hmm. Or organizational or whatever you want to say. But it's been that way for the couple of years, 3 years plus that I've been here. Bad security at home, bad hygiene at home, bad hygiene at work from a security standpoint. I mean, it just is the reality. So how do we personalize it for people to have it resonate,
right,
and stick,
right?
So we've got training and we'll go on site, but the S2Me and team really is going to take that to the next level and be able to really truly personalize it for organizations to say, okay, yeah, we know these are the kind of things we need to talk about, but we know that people are struggling with this. Let's add
right
and give them the tools to do better.
Equipping people with the tools to improve their security programs is something that I think FRSecure really excels at. So giving businesses, not just analyzing businesses' security programs, but then turning around to give them policy recommendations, do additional tests, do training, work with teams to, get budget and that kind of thing are all really crucial pieces to improving security programs. And it's something, again, I think we do a really good job of. One of those tools and one of those assessment types that we provide is penetration testing. I think a lot of businesses still kind of don't exactly know some of the nuances within penetration testing. And so Evan and Brad brought in Eric Hansen, who's one of the lead pen testers here at FRSecure, to kind of talk about some of the differences between penetration testing and some of the other assessment types that a lot of companies are running and why they're important to distinguish. So listening to this one's pretty fascinating as well.
Now I've seen two things that seem sort of common, hopefully less common than they used to be. One is companies that sell penetration or sell vulnerability scans as penetration tests. That's one issue. And then the other is companies that go and ask for a penetration test that have never done a vulnerability scan before. Mm-hmm. Talk about both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a kind of an older school methodology. I think maybe when pen testing was first kind of getting started, where pen testing probably came from somewhere of doing a bold scan and then just saying, okay, well, I have a critical. Let's use that to get into a system, right? And so it was very hand in hand with vulnerability scanning at some point. And you'll still see a lot of companies out there and stuff like that will do that, right? They're essentially just doing a bold scan with validation, right? They're seeing what's on the scan and they're validating whether or not it's an actual vulnerability or if it's a false positive. And that's valuable, but it's just not as valuable as a full penetration test, right? And so you get a lot of confusion where you have, again, people selling kind of the wrong thing, essentially. And then that causes confusion on what people think they want as well. Sometimes people are asking for pen tests because they think they've been getting them the whole time. Mm-hmm. And then they're very surprised to find out that there's different ways of going about this and such. The other side is that, like you said, there's a lot of people who are asking for pen tests, but don't really even know what it is. They've never had one before. And maybe they've never even had, scanning before, and they're jumping straight into the pen test. And obviously that's not always going to be your best bet either, right? Like I said before, vuln scans are a great place to start. It's a good stepping stone for anything, whether it be your, external network, your internal network, or a web application. Scanning it for, common vulnerabilities, common mistakes is going to be a great first step for a while. And then, once you get to that point where you have all that stuff kind of under wraps and you have an understanding of what your environment looks like, going to a penetration test to dig a little deeper and try to find those a little bit more obscure holes is going to be useful.
The ethical hackers that we have on the team just never cease to amaze me. The things that they can do are, kind of baffling and astonishing, but in a really cool and unique kind of way. So it's always intriguing to listen to those guys chat about what it is that they do. And I thought Eric brought a really good perspective there about some of the differences between penetration testing and vulnerability scanning and when to use them and why they're so important. So I thought that was really interesting. So we're coming up on the end of the show. The last episode I wanted to bring up was episode 52. We have to start at 1. We have to start at 52. That's just kind of how these review things tend to work. So let's listen in on episode 52, where Evan and Brad kind of just reminisce about how crazy it's been that they started this thing 52 weeks ago and where it's come today.
Let's talk about our 1 year anniversary.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
It is.
Do you remember when the very first podcast we did?
Yeah. Zoom from our homes on a Sunday evening.
Yeah. I think the first maybe 5 were done that way.
It was more than that. It was like 10.
Really?
We didn't start doing it in person until January.
That was when I think either your wife or my wife or both wives were getting...
Both were like, okay, enough.
Yeah. They wanted their Sunday nights back. So
my wife was getting a little frustrated trying to keep the kids quiet for an hour while we recorded.
Did you ever listen to any of those?
My wife did, and she played a couple back where you could totally hear the kids in the background.
Oh my gosh.
It was, slightly different.
Dave, did you ever listen to any of the first few podcasts?
I started listening. You had Ryan Clodier on for an episode. I think it was 17 or 18, maybe. So that was the first one I listened to because he's a buddy of mine from up in the cities there. And I went back probably half a dozen episodes prior to that and started listening. So I don't think I've got the early ones, but okay. I've got a reason to go back and listen now.
No. Yeah. You can skip them if you want.
It was definitely, there were some awkward pauses because we didn't have a flow down. Oh, you couldn't see the other person really. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, it was weird because I'd wanted to do a podcast for a long time. And, I finally just said, screw it. Brad, you want to do a podcast? And Brad's like, sure. So we just started recording on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I never listened to him. I've never listened to one of our podcasts.
The only ones I listen to are the ones I'm not on.
Yeah.
So
that's weird.
I'm with you.
So then we started recording here, right? We started recording in the boardroom with a Yeti mic.
Yep.
Somewhere in there was my trip to Cancun.
Yep.
Which was weird.
That was when that might have been. No, that wasn't with.
It was January, so it had been like 2.5 months in.
Yeah.
And then I guess the biggest miracle for me is that we did all these podcasts and we didn't miss a week.
I know.
Isn't that nuts?
Crazy is definitely a word for it. It has been quite a ride to run this thing for 52, now 53 weeks. And we definitely couldn't have done it without the support of you all, you loyal listeners. So I want to thank you all for tuning in the last however many weeks you've been with us. And I hope that we can continue to keep this ball rolling moving forward. It's certainly been a fun ride, and I know Evan and Brad are enjoying it as well, and the feedback we've gotten has been pretty positive. So we're excited for more things to come. As always, feel free to follow Evan and Brad on social media. Their Twitter handles are at Evan Francine and at Brad Nye. If you have any feedback about the show, please feel free to send that in to unsecurity@protonmail.com. And shameless plug, if you haven't followed FRSecure yet, we try to do a pretty good job posting the events we're going to, news stories, some helpful blogs, things like that. So please feel free to follow us as well at FRSecure. Otherwise, we'll see you next week with Evan and Brad back as normal.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the UNSECURITY podcast. We value our listeners and would love to hear from you. Give us your feedback by emailing us at unsecurity@protonmail.com. That's unsecurity@protonmail.com. Be sure to tune in next week to hear the latest insights from Brad and Evan.